Hello folks, welcome to the channel and welcome to the Man Cave. So this is part one of a two-part video that I've put together seeking to improve the suspension on my Triumph Speed Twin 1200. I'm going to put a link to part two up here and down in the description below. So I've owned my Triumph now for something in the region of 2 years. It's a 2020 model, so it's a generation 1 model, and with all my riding kit on, I think I weigh something in the region of 92 kilograms. Riding style, anything from relaxed to fast and aggressive riding. What I will say, and I'm sure I'm not the only person that will say this, that the suspension that Triumph put on the bike when they released it, and indeed up until I think the 2024 model still had these on the back of them. I think Triumph could have done a better job. The front is just way too soft and the rear is just way too firm. Even when you set the preload onto the softer setting, it still is just too firm. So I would give Triumph no more out of 10, no more than 5 out of 10 for their standard suspension. So my aim of these videos is basically to improve the suspension and therefore the handling, although the handling is pretty good actually, and therefore the handling of the Triumph Speed Twin 1200 without hopefully breaking the bank and without upsetting the boss, aka the wife. So that's the intention of the video. So part one, we're going to be talking about the rear suspension, and then part two, we're going to be talking about the front suspension. So go and have a look at that, folks. So what's the best thing that we can do with these KYB shocks that were fitted as standard on the Triumph Speed Twin and maybe some other Triumphs as well? Well, the best thing we can do with these is basically just go and throw them in the bin. As you can see, I've already fitted the rear shocks to the bike. Spoiler alert, the handling is now a solid, yes, a solid 8 out of 10, but more of that a little bit later on. Now, we all like a little bit of bling, as do I, and I wanted a piggyback style shock. Öhlins would have set me back something in the region of £1,400 and Nitron about £1,300. And to be honest, I had a budget and I wanted to do the front forks as well, and I thought, oh, it's all going to get a little bit too expensive. So I jumped on the old internet, did a bit more research, and then came up with a company from Thailand called YSS. Never heard of them before. They're a big company, and indeed they even supply teams in the World Superbike Series. So clearly they are a pretty good company. I watched a couple of YouTube videos, as you do, and decided to get their fully adjustable RG362'S in black. These are purchased from UK suspension supplier Brooks, and I spoke to one of their advisors. His name was Mark, very helpful chap actually, who answered a couple of my questions on the YSS shocks. So I'm going to put a link in the description down below for Brooks. So click on that link and that will take you to their website. They're fully adjustable and rebuildable, and the shock springs are of the progressive type, so they're not a linear spring, they're a progressive spring and have a rider weight range. Try saying that when you've had a few beers. They have a rider weight range, so I was informed, of between 70 and 100 kilograms. So they're not tailored to your individual weight like the more expensive brands. However, Brooks can fit a stiffer spring for about £50 if needed. Cost-wise, they're going to cost you about £742, about half the price of the Öhlins or the Nitron shocks. You're going to get a 2-year warranty, and I have to say they are of very good quality. They ride very well, and I've already done about 30 miles on the new shocks, and they are very good. As I said earlier on, they are a solid 8 out of 10, and I've not even run the shocks in yet, but yeah, a solid 8 out of 10. Time to fit, it's going to be about 30 minutes for the pair. Where applicable, I've used information from my Haynes online workshop manual. So let's crack on, and I will show you how relatively straightforward these YSS shocks are to fit. But before we do, let's roll the intro. Let's have a look inside the YSS box, courtesy of Brook Suspension. Keyring, Biscoff biscuit, I'll have that later. Instruction manual with basic information, some shock adjuster tools, and a warranty card with both shocks serial numbers, and I don't need that. Here's the shocks. They look like a quality item and the finish is good. Each shock has its serial number marked on it as indicated here. You have compression adjustment, rebound adjustment, and finally spring preload adjustment, which has a lock screw. All pretty standard stuff for a quality shock. So I am more than pleased with the quality from this mid-range shock. Well done, YSS. I purchased a couple of new black shock caps and screws to replace the Triumph ones from Classic Bike Reich. They're about €34. I think they look good and I'll put a link down below. Registering the shocks warranty takes only a few minutes. Simply go online, scan the QR code in, and then fill in your details together with where you purchased your new shocks from. They'll also want the mileage of your bike and proof of purchase for the 2-year warranty. Then once completed, you get the warranty confirmation via email. I did a dry run on the right side of the bike without videoing it, just to see where any potential problems were. Fortunately, there were none really. My Haynes workshop manual said that you can do the shock swap one at a time without having to support the bike, so that's what I did. Just make sure the bike is on a level surface. The shock eyelets have zip ties on them, keeping a washer and bushing from being lost. Rightly or wrongly, as I'm not a technician or suspension expert, I measured the distance of the original shock between the centre of the eyelets, which I marked on my bench. As you can see here, it was 385 millimeters. The YSS shock has a length adjust at the bottom of it to give some 10 millimeters of adjustment. I just wanted to make sure that the new shock was the same length as the old shock. I used 2 adjustable spanners, and with a bit of force in the correct direction, the lock nut moved. Then I screwed the adjuster in until I had the correct shock length, which was when only 2 threads were showing. I've just loosened the footrest bolt using a hack kind of method, just to show how I remove the E-clip. I used a flat bladed plastic tool to then push the clip off and then remove the pivot pin. Then slide out the footrest together with the metal plate. Make sure you don't lose the ball bearing. Using a 10mm spanner and 6mm hex bit, undo the footrest bolt, remove the nut, and then leave the bolt in place to support the exhaust. Then undo the 10mm exhaust clamp bolt. Remove the footrest and the exhaust will slide out with a bit of rocking motion if needed. At the bottom of the shock, undo the 14mm nut and 14mm bolt. Remove the nut but leave the bolt in situ at this stage. Take an 8mm hex bit or Allen key and undo the top bolt. It will be stiff as it has thread lock on it. I won't be using the original bolt as I will be replacing it with new ones from Classic Bike Reich, but I will be using the original washer. Remove the bottom bolt, and this is where I nearly had a heart attack. I thought the bike would drop towards me, but it dropped toward the other side with the shock on it. Handy tip, stand the other side and reach over the seat to remove the shock. The bike is on a level surface, so it wasn't really an issue, but I did see one of the YouTubers' videos where the bike did actually fall over. Make sure you don't lose this bushing. Blue medium thread lock is used on the top and bottom mounting bolts, and it's best to clean the mounting spigot threads to clear out any old thread lock, which could give you a false torque reading when you come to re-torque the bolts. Here I'm using an 8mm tap to clean out the old thread lock. And a nice clean hole ready for some new thread lock. I'm not using the original top bolt. If I was, I would clean it to get rid of the old thread lock, but I will be using the original washer. Put some grease on the spigot mount and then put the YSS supplied washer over it. Apply grease to the insides of the eyelets of your new shock absorber and also on the inside of the YSS bushing. On goes the new shock with the old washer and new bolt and shock cap. We will put some thread lock on that soon. Medium blue thread lock goes onto the lower bolt. Make sure the bolt is nice and clean before you put the new thread lock on. And this is the position I should have been in for taking the shock off. Then simply raise the bike a little and feed the bolt in. And don't forget to put the nut on. Now the shock's on, take the top bolt out and apply some thread lock. Torque the new bolt up, which uses a 6mm hex bit up to a torque of 28 Newton meters. The lower bolt is torqued to 48 Newton meters using a 14mm socket and spanner. Then just make sure the lock nut at the bottom is secure, trying not to scuff your nice new shock. Carefully refit the exhaust. Pop the foot peg back in. This is to support the exhaust. Then tighten the 10mm exhaust bolt, which is torqued up to a torque setting of 10 Newton meters. It does feel way too much when you tighten it, but it is 10 Newton meters. Pop the nut back on and torque to 24 Newton meters with your 10mm spanner and 6mm hex bit. And I suggest you just give your foot peg pieces a bit of a clean. Put some grease on the ball bearing and pivot pin. Put the metal plate back and then ease the footrest into position. It's quite easy to do actually. Try not to lose the ball bearing and then insert the pivot pin with a gentle waggle if needed. And then refit the E-clip. Give it a final wipe and that's it, job done. Okay, then let's talk about the settings that I've dialed in on my YSS shock, shall we? So first off then, I'm just going to say that in my opinion, the standard shocks are just way too stiff, even on the softest preload setting. On anything other than a smooth road surface, I just found that the ride was uncomfortable and yeah, it wasn't very nice actually. So if your budget can stretch to it, then get a new set of decent shock absorbers and that will transform the bike. If that's the only thing you do and you can't afford to do the front end of the bike, then I think I could live with the soft front end, but I would definitely do the rear suspension without a shadow of a doubt. Now weight wise, I've already said earlier on, I'm a 92 kilogram rider in all my riding kit, and in relation to what we can do on the YSS shocks, as we've already spoken about it, we can adjust the compression. So we've got 25 clicks of compression adjustment there, and if you're going to make a large amount of adjustment, then use a flat bladed screwdriver just to turn it out. And if you've got a couple of adjustments to make, then you can use your finger and your thumb on the top there. In relation to the rebound adjustments, again 25 clicks of adjustment and you can use your finger and thumb, so really straightforward. The preload ring adjuster, then what they do is there's a lock screw on there, so just undo the lock screw with the 3mm Allen key they supply, undo that and then insert the adjuster tool into the hole and then just turn it clockwise or anti-clockwise to either load or unload the preload on the shock absorber. And then once you've got the desired load, then just tighten up the lock screw again. So what settings have I got on the shock for me as a 92 kilogram rider? I'm going to keep it simple. I'm not going to show you how I did it, but my wife came in, gave me a hand so I could set up the static and the rider sag. Lots of videos out on the internet about it, so go and have a look at that. The settings I've got on mine then, so screwed fully in, so fully hard on the compression. I then come back 12 clicks, and on the rebound I've dialed it fully hard and then come back 12 clicks. So mid-range for both the compression and the rebound. The preload adjuster, the collar there, I've got 41 millimeters of distance between the top of the collar and the shock here, as you can see on the video. So 41 millimeters both sides. And then what does that give me as a 92 kilogram rider? So here we go. So as a 92 kilogram rider, it won't mean much to some of you out there, but this is what it gives me. So that gives me 19 millimeters of static sag and then 41 millimeters of rider sag. So the rider's absolutely, it's night and day between the original shocks and these YSS shocks. It has transformed the bike. It is night and day. So I've done about 30 miles on the shock. It's going to take I think it's a couple hundred miles for the shocks to bed in, so there will be a little bit of tweaking going on as I come to a better setting. But at the moment I'm really happy with those 12 clicks on fully hard, both for the compression and the rebound, and the 41 mil on the preload there as well. So it's a very comfortable ride, but I will, as time progresses and the mileage goes on the shocks, I will make the odd adjustment here or there to make the ride even better. And I hope all that makes sense. So things to point out then. So I've made a little bit of a list for things I've forgotten to maybe highlight in the video. So here we go, just going to rattle through them then. So you can get this shock not only in all black, but they do it in a silver and black as well if you don't want the all black. Also, if your budget doesn't stretch to the 740 odd pounds for the piggyback shock, then you can get the non-piggyback shock, which is about 200 pounds cheaper, and that will set you back about 535 pounds. But I'll put a link in the description down below to whisk you to Brook's website. The YSS shock is not a cheap shock, however it is a quality item, so I'm more than happy with the quality of the shock, and I'm quite a fussy chap as well. So I would say they are a quality mid-range shock, but they are significantly cheaper than the likes of Öhlins and Nitron, but my budget didn't stretch to those, and to be honest, I'm really happy with this for what I'm using the bike for. So I've already mentioned the torque settings when we've installed everything back onto the bike. So they are values that I've taken from my Haynes online manual, but obviously they are my settings. Things might change, so I would say consult your own manuals when it comes to torque settings. Don't rely on my settings. So you have been warned, as they say. Now, something I haven't done, but you can do, I may do it tomorrow actually, is just put a mark on the bolt and the surrounding collar, and it's a straight line. And then obviously if the bolt over a period of time with the movement of the shock starts to come undone, although it's thread locked, if it starts to come undone, then you're going to see the mark's going to split, and then that will draw your attention to it, and then you can address it and re-torque it or see why it's coming undone. But I haven't done that, but yeah, I may do that tomorrow actually, so I may have to go and raid the wife's nail varnish drawer. So yeah, you can do that, and that would be a belt and braces job. In part 2, we are going to be changing the standard fork springs and oil with a kit from Hyperpro. So what I'm going to do next is make a cup of tea, and then I'm going to eat this very nice Biscoff biscuit that Brook Suspension kindly put in the box before they dispatched it to me. So thank you very much, Brook Suspension, for the very nice Biscoff biscuit. I think what we do next though is jump on the bike and then take it for a very quick spin. So let's do that now. Okay folks, we are out and about on the speed trend now with the newly installed YSS RG362 shock absorbers, which I've done about 30 miles on the bike now, and I have to say it's transformed the bike basically from being a 5 out of 10, as we said earlier on in the video, to a solid 8 out of 10. The handling on the back now and the comfort it's night and day between the old shocks and these shocks from YSS. Even over all this rough stuff here in the road, it's basically just laughing at the bumps, even going over some of the shallow potholes. So Triumph should have put a decent set of shocks on many years ago when they brought the bike out in 2019, 2020, but instead they chose to put a budget shock on the back, which was barely adequate, as we've made mention in the video. But the new shocks now that I've installed, They're mid-range shocks. They're not fancy Öhlins, they're not fancy nitrons, but they are an excellent bit of kit. And I think YSS are one of the largest shock manufacturers in the world, as they say. Yeah, but I'm more than happy with the shocks on the back of the bike. Now, one thing I will say is they basically laugh in the face of all the bumps in the road, which is great news, so they're doing their job properly. And the only thing I need to do, I've done about 30 miles on the bike now, is over the next couple of weeks is just dial them in from the original base settings I've put on there. But those original base settings are pretty good actually. There won't be too many tweaks going on, and it just makes the bike a joy to ride now. It was good before, but it's now even better. Yeah, a solid 8 out of 10. Really enjoy it now. And of course, as I'm not getting pinged out of the seat, it just makes the whole ride less fatiguing, so you can stay out for longer, I guess. But the handling has certainly improved. It's just more compliant, and plush is a good word on the back of the bike. Obviously, the front suspension, I haven't touched it. It's still soft, it still dives. But if you can only afford to do the rear, then I think I could live with the front again, as we mentioned in the video. And if your budget doesn't stretch to the piggyback shocks from YSS, then maybe consider the non-piggyback ones that they do, which are a couple of £100 cheaper, the RG362'S. But either way, I would say get rid of the crappy OEM standard suspension that try and put on the back of these bikes, even up until 2024. I think then they've changed to piggyback shocks. But really happy with the shocks from YSS. Now, earlier on in the video, I made reference to the sag settings. I have assumed that the suspension travel is as it was earlier before I changed the shocks, i.e. 120 millimeters. Now, I don't know if that's the case because it's all to do with swing arm ratio, and I have written an email to YSS to try and clarify that, but I've just had to assume that it was 120 mils of rear suspension travel to set up the static and the rider sag. But I think I'll be tweaking that in the next week or two. But suspension is really compliant, and very happy that I spent the extra cash on that suspension. It just means that I'm not going to get as fatigued being bounced out of the seat, and the ride is just very compliant. I like it a lot. Anyway guys, I'm no suspension expert, I'm just a normal rider who does the YouTube thing and tries to put some better things on their bikes just to help you guys out and myself out as well. So if this video is going to help somebody, then great, I've done my job. Very impressed with the suspension unit, the shocks from YSS. That's it. I'm going to go and do a bit more riding. In the meantime, ride safe, keep the bike the right way up, and see you all again soon in the next video, which will be, from me, that will be putting the Hyperpro forks and heavier oil in the front. And I don't think that's going to be a 30-minute job like fitting these rear shock absorbers was. I think that's going to be a 3-hour job. Anyway, ride safe, see you all again soon. Cheerio for now. Wahaha. I love it. Love this bike.